Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to this Friday Reflections on this Thursday, the 17th of April, 2025. I hope you are well wherever you are tuning into this from. Today, I would like to begin a series of these podcasts on this book, A Mystic Muslim Community in Britain, Meaning in the West and for the West, by Professor Tayfun Atay. This is a secular academic study of the Naqshbandi community in London in the 1990s, led by Maulana Shaykh Nazim. Reason being for this is the fact that the perspective that is shared in this book is different from the usual perspective that we will find the usual perspectives that we will find both within the Naqshbandi community and also the perspectives that we will find often from academia. It's an interesting perspective from another angle that we don't see from. It needed someone like Tayfun Atay, who was very secular, who wasn't so faithful, to see the community from a fresh perspective. And so I think this is useful. And I'm going to read from this book, and I hope you enjoy this too and find this beneficial. The book itself, as Typhon mentions in his preface, was taken from his field work between 1991 and 1992. And it was originally his dissertation for university, but he was encouraged to publish it. And eventually he edited it into a book and published this in 2012. The book is available through EHV, which stands for, I think, Europäische Hochschulverlag, and it's based in Bremen. So it's not a book that is so easy to find, but you can find it if you search for it online. And it's interesting. I found it well worth reading. So I'm not going to read everything in the book, but what I am going to read is highlights from a personal story, reflections on fieldwork, which is more about Typhon himself and his own experiences with the Naqshbandi community in London. So I'm just going to start on page 92 and read a few pages today and then give some reflections. My first contact with the Sheikh and the Naqshbandi community in London was in 1990, when some Turkish friends during postgraduate studies in Britain took me to the Peckham Mosque during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. At that time, I was doing the MA at SOAS and planning to do research on Sufism, a subject which interested me more than anything else within the anthropology of Islam. However, my initial thought was to do this research in Turkey and try to make sense of the role of the Sufi orders, the tariqahs, particularly the Naqshbandis, in connection with the recent Islamic social political mobilization in secular Turkey. When I mentioned the idea of studying Sufism to one of the friends, he informed me about the activities of the Naqshbandi Sufi order in London, led by a sheikh of Turkish Cypriot origin, which he and his friends had attended on several occasions. This was the first time that I had heard of Shaykh Nazim and his Naqshbandi community in London. After we talked a bit more about it, my friend suggested I join them at their next visit to the Peckham Mosque, where the Sheikh and his followers gathered to perform the zikr ceremony every Thursday night. I enthusiastically accepted this invitation, which led to my first encounter with the Sheikh and his community. At this initial step of my entry into the field, I had a background of complete profanity, having been brought up in segments of Turkish society that wore their faith lightly. I knew next to nothing about even the most basic tenets of Islamic belief and worship. Besides, My position was clearly rooted in the secular, more specifically leftist camp within the well-known socio-political polarization between secularism and Islam in contemporary Turkey. This was my personal and no doubt also cultural and political position as an anthropologist at the threshold of the mosque of Shaykh Nazim's community. The first thing that struck me in the mosque was the obvious heterogeneity of people from different national and ethnic origins, and particularly the visibility of the Western people who had converted into Islam. When we entered the mosque, everyone was waiting for the sheikh to come and start the zikr ceremony. At the orders of the mosque, sorry, at the corners of the mosque, there were people selling religious materials, such as the sheikh's books, cassette and videotapes of his recorded talks, and his pictures and posters. For a person like me, who come from a Muslim country and had an image of a disciplined mosque atmosphere, these were quite extraordinary scenes. What was really eye-opening for me, however, was to see the men and women sharing the same space. Although the upper circle of the mosque was reserved for them, many women were at the ground floor, sitting, standing, and even talking with the men. Then the sheikh came with a lot of people around him. His appearance was striking. The crowd in the mosque rushed towards him, jostling each other in their attempt to reach the sheikh and kiss his hands and feet. Moving through them with difficulty, the sheikh finally came to the front of the mosque, to the mihrab, and immediately started to perform the night prayer, which is called Yatsi, Arabic Isha, to be followed by the zikr. Everyone in the mosque joined him and performed the prayers. These first visions of Shaykh Nazim's community filled me with excitement and confusion. Above all, I found myself unable to behave properly in this religious atmosphere. I was able to do my ablutions by following the directions given by a friend and to perform the prayer by simply imitating the person next to me, which I later realized could never pass unnoticed by experienced worshippers. I think this is an interesting point to bear in mind because for those of us who have been Muslim either all our lives or even in my case for a quarter of a century, Islam is second nature to us. It's very normal. And the way Muslims do things within the circles that we're familiar with is totally normal to us. We don't even think about it anymore. But to someone like this, even though he's Turkish, but he was coming from a very secular background, it was all very strange to them. Now, this is something which we don't always consider within our circles because we tend to see things from our perspective. And why is that strange to them? Why does that bother them? That shouldn't bother them. That's nothing. Well, clearly it is for people who come from the backgrounds. These first visions of Sheikh Nazim's community filled me with excitement and confusion. Above all, I found myself unable to behave properly. Oh, sorry, I read that paragraph, didn't I? During the zikr, I watched the others who seemed to me transfixed with the spiritual aura of the ritual. After the ceremony, people started to chant some religious phrases, which were unfamiliar to me, and which I learned properly only later during my fieldwork. Meanwhile, people were moving slowly towards the sheikh in order to see the sheikh and observe what was happening there. I joined them. As I gradually came closer, I noticed that when people reached the sheikh, they showed their respect or praised him by kissing his hands. Suddenly, I realized with alarm that if I continued to move forward, very soon too, I would be in front of the sheikh and would have to perform the same act. That is, I would have to kiss his hand, although not necessarily his foot. To me, this was unacceptable and even unimaginable, so I turned back and came out of the crowd, though with difficulty and trying not to draw attention to my bad manners towards the sheikh. You see, again, this is something which for murids within the community, this is perfectly normal and it's not something that bothers us. But for someone who's not used to it, it can be quite shocking. Afterwards, a young Turkish Cypriot man who was one of the murids and a friend of my friend's asked me whether or not I'd kissed the sheikh's hand. I can remember how furious my no answer to him was, since I felt offended by his question. Ironically, it was this same murid who played the most crucial role in giving me access to the community and introduced me to one of its most prominent members a year later. Nothing that I saw in the mosque, however, upset me more than the green flag waved by someone behind the sheikh while the people were greeting him and chanting religious phrases. Anyone acquainted with Islamic culture will know that green is the color of Islam. At that moment, however, the green flag I saw being waved brought to my mind an event from Turkish history, the Kubilay event of 1930. That year, many men, a small town in western Turkey, witnessed a terrifying event with nationwide consequences. A number of people said to have come from outside the town attempted to start a religious revolt against the secular regime established by Ataturk in 1923. The investigators had millennial motives, and their leader claimed to be the expected Mahdi. A young army officer, Mustafa Femi Kubilay, who was on duty in the town, stood up against them, but was knocked down and his head hacked off by the rebel leader. The authorities soon regained control of the town, punished the rebels, and afterwards throughout the country arrested many senior religious figures alleged to be linked with the perpetrators. Today, the incident is kept alive in people's minds, and secular Turks particularly consider it the most ferocious example of Islamic religious fanaticism directed against the foundations of the modern secular republic. The Kubilay incident is described as such in the schools and officially commemorated every year. Again, this is something that before reading this book, even I was unaware of. Many people would be, unless you have that history or background, in which case, I mean, for me, a green flag is a green flag. A green flag waved in a mosque, it's obviously about Islam. You know, green is the Prophet Muhammad's favorite color. Green is symbolic of the color of paradise. There is literally nothing negative I see in the color green or in a green flag. But obviously, this was very different for someone like Tayfun, who come from a secular background and was aware of something that he'd been taught through school, which was part of their history in Turkey. And from what he tells me here, it's quite a horrifying incident as well. When they were inciting people to join their rebellion, the insurrectionists used the green flag, which they took from a mosque in the town and on which they had written the Kalima Tawhid. In the minds of most Turkish secularists, the green flag recalls this ferocious act as a symbol of nothing but bloodthirsty delinquents who are ready to kill anybody in the name of religion. The green flag waved in the South London mosque behind the Naqshbandi Sheikh reminded me of the Kubilay incident and gave me a feeling of deep insecurity within the green world of Islam. And this is the point. It's not that, I mean, in hindsight, he knows the person wasn't doing anything wrong and was just a faithful Muslim. But the thing is, because of his history and what he was aware of, and suppose the trauma that puts on him and others like him, then seeing that green flag meant something completely different to him. And these are things that we have to be aware of when dealing with people from different backgrounds, different communities. Because if we're not, especially someone in my role, where I am actually a chaplain at a university, I'm a sheikh within the community, I have to be aware of different angles, different things that may be playing on people's minds, that may be bothering people. Because being aware of this and how I speak to people, um, it's all about conveying the message and how we can actually have understanding for them and how we can convey our message in a way that will be understood. Because if I'm not aware of things like this, I could do a terrible faux pas, which actually completely stops any kind of relationship or understanding from happening or makes it extremely difficult. So this is something we must always be aware of when we're in that kind of a role. Unfortunately, not everybody is, but we need to be. These were my feelings and impressions on my first encounter with Shaykh Nazim's community. By and large, they exemplify my perspective on Islam before I engaged in the fieldwork on the same community. The same feelings were still at work during my initial attempts to get access to the community and also during the early stages of fieldwork. What was it that constituted these feelings in me? Why did I refrain from moving further towards the Sheikh and reject the act of kissing the Sheikh's hand? Why did I find the question whether or not I had kissed the Sheikh's hand so offensive to my integrity? Why was I so frightened by a green flag? What was at work here? And you see a good thing here about an academic, and the academic's approach here is the fact he's questioning these things. Actually, this is something that as faithful Muslims, we're supposed to check ourselves every day. Check what we did. Is there something that we did that we could improve upon? Um, the book. The book is called A Muslim Mystic Community in Britain, Meaning in the West and for the West, and it's by Tayfun Atay. This is the book. It's a fascinating book because it gives a different perspective from what we normally read, and also reveals things that. Well, there's a lot of things in here that remind me of my own early experiences with the Naqshbandi tariqah, but it's like coming from a fresh perspective, so it's quite interesting. Anyway, let's get back to what I was reading. I did not ask these questions at the time. Once I realized halfway through fieldwork that my feelings about actions like kissing the Sheikh's hand and symbols like the Muslim green had changed, then these questions started to bother me. The act of kissing the Sheikh's hand had become part of my daily routine whenever I met him during fieldwork. I was also wearing a green cap, not only in community meetings and zikr gatherings and prayers, but also while walking in the streets of London. Besides, the more I engaged in the life of the community, the more I was embedded in the practical requirements of an Islamic life. Having at first not known how to perform the daily prayers or even to say the Fatiha, I had now reached the point at which I was reciting the call to prayer or guiding new people in the zikr ceremony. Perhaps nothing indicates these changes more clearly than the following. One difficulty I had early in fieldwork was using the Muslim greeting phrases, Salam alaikum, peace be with you, or in reply to it, alaikum assalam. Whenever I had to use them, I felt strange. In due course, I got so used to saying them and even did so spontaneously that I adapted it to the discourse of the community. One day, I witnessed my wife's difficulty in replying to such a greeting by a woman disciple, and I asked her what the matter was. In other words, I now found my wife's attitude strange and was criticizing her for doing just what I had once been doing. And that's another thing that as murids within the community or as Muslims, uh, we can have a tendency to do that ourselves if we're not careful. It's something I try to guard against. But, you know, something that then becomes, we get used to, and then we question why someone else finds it a problem or why they don't do things in the way we expect. This is something to be careful of because it's actually a lack of adab on our part when we do that. And the whole of tariqah is really about adab. So it's something to be careful of. Clearly, my feelings of estrangement had shifted. It seemed as if I had left one world and entered another, set up on a completely different basis, particularly in terms of knowledge and meaning. It was through this epistemological transformation that I realized the strength and compulsion of a particular discourse and became aware of how difficult it can be to consider the world of others on equal terms with one's own. Yet this does not mean that the process of fieldwork had turned me into a devout Muslim. What happened was simply that my perception of the Muslim green had radically changed. The symbol was not transformed into sublime for me, but I had stopped fearing it. By the time fieldwork drew to a close, the green flag did not challenge my sense of self anymore. Changing objectives. The scene I'd witnessed in the Peckham Mosque, though frustrating in some respects, struck me very forcefully. I was excited by the diversity of the Sheikh's followers in an ethnic, national and cultural terms. On the one hand, I'd asked myself how the Sheikh could satisfy what must be the very diverse expectations of all these people. How could he attract them all to himself? On the other hand, he was quite a cheerful person. I remembered the stereotyped image of Islam in Western media, best reflected in the stern face of Ayatollah Khamenei. But here was a Muslim leader with a sense of humor who was making jokes and easily accessible to everyone, women as well as men. With these thoughts in my mind, I started to wonder about whether I might change my plans for research in Turkey to study this Sufi community in London. From the anthropological perspective, there were so many interesting things here to study. Despite this new inclination early in my first year in the PhD program, I continued to think of fieldwork in Turkey. When I went to Turkey at Christmas 1990, however, things changed completely. During this 1 month trip, I planned to make some preliminary inquiries regarding an appropriate setting for my proposed study, but the political mood of the country was not promising. Following recent attempts on the lives of prominent secular figures and allegations against Islamic circles in this respect, tension in the country was higher than ever. There seemed no chance of easy access to the world of tariqah, such as the Naqshbandi, which was at the forefront of Islamic mobilization and the target of many accusations by secularists. My main focus was to have been the relation between politics and religion, but under these circumstances, it seemed vain to hope to make an accurate. Sorry, it seemed vain to make an adequate investigation. After returning to London, I very shortly reorientated myself to the idea of studying the Naqshbandi community of Shaykh Nazim in London. The community was colourful and attractive, and I had greater hopes of being able to enter it and join the activities than I could have had in the stony ground of Turkey amidst the sharpened polarization between the secular and Islamic. Above all, time was an important factor for me, since I had a 3 year scholarship, the first year of which was already passing. I had actually 2 years, both to conduct at least 1 year of fieldwork and write up the thesis. There was no guarantee of an extension of the grant, so I made up my mind to take the London option. I'll leave that there today. Let me know what you think of that. And I think it is an interesting perspective. I'm obviously not going to go through the whole book. I'm going to go through selected portions that I think most might be more interesting due to the perspectives that they share or the insights that they give from the perspective of the author. But I think it's a worthwhile thing to do. Please let me know what you think. And if you have any thoughts or questions on this, please drop them in the comments and let me know. I wish you all the very best. Have a wonderful Jummah and weekend. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be with you all.